Greetings, everyone. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I am so glad you're here. Thanks for tuning in. Tonight, we will continue reading The Falsification of African Consciousness, Eurocentric History, Psychiatry, and the Politics of White Supremacy by Amos Wilson. Please tune in.
Greetings. My name is the Revolutionary Matron, and my show is called The Learning Curve. I broadcast on a network called KWAZ Radio. There are other hosts on the network I'd like you to meet.
Greetings, everyone. This is Koku from the Bitter Medicine Podcast, inviting you to tune in to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio.
Peace, family. This is Oni, inviting you to listen to the Pro-Black Perspective, where black problems are addressed with black solutions.
This is D Webb with the Harsh Reality Podcast, asking you to tune in where we tackle the news of the day that affects our community, only on KWAZ Radio.
The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed here belong solely to the respondent, and they do not necessarily reflect any broadcast networks, affiliates, nor sponsors. The Learning Curve is a broadcast created for the benefit of my global community. Black is a consciousness. Content is being used for our commentary, research, criticism, education, scholarship, teaching, preaching, and news reporting. No copyright infringement is intended. I will make enunciation mistakes. I will give you my opinion about the information. And if you ever ask, I will send you my source.
Changing our name starts on page 38 of the text. We don't have time to talk about Jesse Jackson and his African American campaign and the New York Times, which feels we are not African American until the New York Times says we are African American. I want to read this excerpt from January 31st, 1989, the New York Times. A movement led by Jesse Jackson, which is interesting in that it is a total misinterpretation and distortion of history right there. To call Blacks African Americans has met with both rousing approval and deep-seated skepticism in a debate that is coming to symbolize the role and history of Blacks in this country. Even these people recognize that a name is connected to a social role. A name is not just something you call people, but the name a people are called signifies their role. Therefore, a change of name represents a people's attempt to change their role and position in the world. Some Negroes think that to change our name is just some foolish game we're playing. It's not about that. Even other people recognize that. This change of name, if it comes, will be deeply felt, and if what it implies becomes a true part of the African American personality, represents fundamental change in this world. This is not a game we're playing here. Identity is very important, as is the idea that Black people would dare to name themselves. Whites recognize that as an incursion on their power of naming and an incursion on their power of domination. History is what creates a shared identity in a people. It is based on that shared identity that they act collectively. To take away a people's history, to degrade their history is to degrade their sense of shared identity. It is to remove the basis upon which they must behave collectively and reach their goals collectively. That's why history is rewritten and why people get alarmed about it. When we suffer from social amnesia, we forget the debt we owe to the past and future generations. We then misinterpret our accomplishments as solely our own individual achievements. I remind my college student audiences that you're not alone here in this college just because you're smart, because you come from the right family, because you scored high on the SATs and all that other stuff. Blacks have scored high on the SATs since the beginning of time. We've had good families and the right families from the beginning. We've had 4.0 students from the beginning. We've had all of that, and we were still kept out of the university. So you're not here because of your own personal achievement. You're here because people who didn't score anything put their bodies and their lives on the line to see that you got here, and you owe them something for that. If this institution decides to put you out, it will be the same people who will be up here to see that you get right in here again. Some of you want to forget that history and then claim that you owe them nothing when you make your couple of little bucks in front of a TV camera or some other place. Not only do you forget them, you forget the ones coming after you, and you don't make sure that they can also get in and their privileges are also maintained. You act like revolution is something that's temporary and not permanent. It is permanent. You forget your history, you forget who you are, and you lose your obligation to the past, to those who made your success possible, and do not fulfill your obligations to those who come after you. Some of whom will be your own sons and daughters. When we suffer from social amnesia, we identify with abstractions. I'm not Black. I'm not African. I'm a human being. I'm an American. Sterile, abstract identity. The closer we get to it, the less we see it of it, and the more we recognize that it has no meaning. What is that? Who is that? What does that stand for? What does it mean? It's empty. And people who identify themselves with these abstractions are also empty and experience their lives as empty. As people who have no feelings, they identify with the abstraction so as to escape the feelings. Therefore, we see them detached from and cut off from themselves as persons, as well as from their people. In fact, they use their abstraction identity to escape their responsibilities to their own people and to escape the pain and struggle that happens today to a part of our situation, to be a part of our situation. I love the challenge of being African in today's world. It's wonderful. I love digging my heels against the impossible odds of being Black in America. What greater challenge could we have in life today than to be African? What great testament to our heroism than to overcome the problems that face us today? What greater opportunity can we have to transform ourselves and transform the world in the process? Why would we wish to escape this kind of challenge? It's too wonderful, too magnificent. We should eat at this kind of challenge for breakfast. When we become socially amnesic, we forget our location in time and space, because history is about locating oneself in time and space. History is a grid, a set of coordinates that permit the individual to locate himself in reference to other points in the world. History is a mathematical concept, ladies and gentlemen. It is a geometrical concept. It locates and positions one relative to other things. History and the manipulation of time. When one is shorn of one's past and one does not see the direction of one's future and is very uncertain of one's present, then they cannot tell from whence one comes and where one is going, where one is, and suffers as a result. Let me quickly read the context of history as a time dimension from a little piece done in the Omni magazine, February 1984. It's called Timeless Minds. It reads, "When I awake you, the past will be gone." Dr. Bernard Aronson of the New Jersey Neuropsychiatric Institute told a deeply hypnotized college student. When the when the post-hypnotic suggestion took hold, the student became drowsy and infantile, losing both memory and the power of speech. The hypnotist had given the student a post-hypnotic suggestion: when I awake you, the past will be gone. He then woke the student. The student reported how he felt. He exhibited infantile behavior, losing both memory and the powers of speech. Later, he reported a vague sense of meaningless. Why am I here? What is my purpose? What is the meaning of life? Those kinds of querying issues, a loss of history, a loss of his past, was created within the student. The young man without a past was one of the 10 college students who took part in an unusual experiment with psychological time warp. So, there was a manipulation of time. A manipulation of an individual's past is a manipulation of his time dimension, a warping of his time, which warps his perception, warps his experience and perception of himself. People who play with our history are playing with our sense of time, playing with our sense of place and who we are and what we're about. So is history just an elective? No, ladies and gentlemen. Aronson gave some subjects post hypnotic suggestions that eliminated their past, present, or future. He gave others a vastly expanded past, present, or future. The consequences were profound. With no future, people feel a loss of identity and a euphoric, mystical sensation, free of both anxiety and motivation. One student found himself in a boundless, imminent present, expanding the future. On the other hand, canceled all fears of death and induced serenity, contemplation, and a feeling of self fulfillment. Being robbed of a past brought on a semi infantile torpid state, and the students with a dilated past became egocentric and inhibited. Canceling the present was the most disturbing, however. One subject turned catatonic, others became severely depressed and almost schizophrenic. Stopping subjective time altogether produced an eerie sensation of death. The world moves on, but I don't, one student observed. Aronson's conclusion: life must carry some sense of direction from the past to present or present to future to seem worth living. People given a present shorn of a past and a future become preoccupied with death and behave like schizophrenics. What are we saying here? The hypnotist, by manipulating this man's attitude towards his past, manipulated his consciousness, real capacities, and abilities. He just wasn't in a state of illusion. He had a memory problem. He had problems getting meaning out of life. He lost his sense of purpose in life. He became lethargic, drowsy, and sleepy. People who manipulate the past and present manipulate one's mentality, sanity, contact with reality, and the ability to deal with reality. In other words, the manipulation of history creates real effects in the individual's personality. Our history not being taught to us correctly ensures that our potential will forever be underdeveloped as a people and that we will not challenge those who rule over us. That's why they start with slavery. Intellectual structures and powers are underdeveloped when we suffer from amnesia. They are restricted and alienated. Some of my Black students say, hey, I know nothing about Black history, but I know math, I know computer science, and I know this and that. So apparently it doesn't do me much harm. Oh no, don't deceive yourself. Being cut off from your past only means that you have gained knowledge at the cost of being alienated. You have gained an alienated knowledge. Alienated knowledge can only be used in the interest of aliens. Look at who you work for once. You know computer science and you don't know your history? That's one of the unwritten rules. They will teach you math and science and so forth to the degree that you forget what and who you are, your history, and forget your connectedness with your people. Because it's only when you are unconnected that you can be of use to aliens. You cannot use alienated knowledge for yourself. Knowledge must be connected and contained in a historical structure, in a cultural structure, if it is to work for a particular people. That's why you can get degrees in business administration and build no businesses. You can be the CEO of Xerox, yet you won't build your own. History and wealth creation. Our resources are pillaged and our creativity is retarded when we become socially amnesic. We forget coping skills that were learned in the past and that yet can still be useful in the present. If we forget everything we've learned in the past, what babbling babies we would become. If we forget everything we learned in the past, we would not know how to cope with many of the problems and issues that confront us as we move through life. We can't drop our past. That's where we learned our coping skills. Let me give a quick example of what it really means. Let's look at economics. African Americans earn $300 billion per year spending money, which would make us the ninth or 10th richest nation on earth, yet we perceive ourselves as poor. A group that can only spend money can only support other people's. Harlem's 125th Street now contains 68 Korean businesses, 68 and growing fast. But I don't see any Koreans walking up and down those blocks spending any money at all. In fact, I hardly see any other ethnic group on that street. I only see African people. Even Hispanics are not in any great degree there. Yet we enrich the Koreans and other ethnic groups. We support them. We feed their children while ours starve and die, become addicted to crack, rob and steal, and do the kinds of things we do not approve of. This is a result of a people who have forgotten their history. We say, well, if we had the money, it's not the money. We are not suffering from a lack of money. No way. Over 50 billion is earned and created by Blacks between New York and Newark. So we're not suffering from any great money problems. We're suffering from an absence of an economic system. Money is not a system. Money is what it is. A system involves systematic and organized utilization of money, a systematized utilization and distribution of money. Without the pattern, without the system, without the organization, one does not have an economy. An economy exists prior to money. There were economies in the world before money was invented. We don't even have to have money to have an economic system. So ultimately, when we study economic systems, we recognize that an economic system at its base refers to the nature of the relationship between people. Remember, I say relationships are the basis of all economies. How are you connected? It is the systematic way that people choose to relate one to another that makes an economic system, not money. When we lack a systematic way of relating to each other, then we can have money and still be poor, have money and be robbed, which is what we are now. Our money, for the most part, goes towards survival costs. You pay rent to another group of people. You pay your utilities to another group of people. You pay for your food from another group of people. And it's very difficult to try to reintegrate the black dollar into a black economy because black people don't own a lot of property. Black people don't own a lot of banks. Black people own farms, but those farms aren't in every area. So we don't have the ability to effectively reintegrate our dollars into a black economy. But we're working on that, aren't we? Economics of maladjustment. The economics of maladjustment. Why do we suffer from this problem then? Why is the black personality created? I try to get across the fact that every maladjusted characteristic in the black personality serves an economic function. Each maladjustive characteristic is not there by accident. It's not there simply because Europeans hate us. It's there because it maintains their economic dominance. If I've got money, I can help you. But if I distrust you, I won't help you and you may not make it. It's not the absence of money, it's the presence of mistrust. If I will not cooperate, if you can't rely on me, then we cannot have an economic system, even though we may have money. In other words, a people must trust, be reliable, be dependable, have respect for each other if they are to develop a viable economic system. When they have those kinds of relationships, they have a social system and they can build and they grow economically. Suspiciousness and other negatives are implanted in the collective black personality so that African people cannot challenge European people, even though we are a majority of the people on this earth and we live over the riches of this earth. A people who do not share a history, who do not appreciate the shared experiences that their history represents, are people who cannot utilize mutual trust, dependability, and so forth upon which to build an economic social system. African people who forget their history are a people who forget that they had an economy before the European came into existence. They are people who forget that their economy was developed and maintained prior to the European imperial ascendancy. Let me quote something here about a people who didn't forget some part of their history. These are African people cited in the New York Times, Monday, November 30th, 1987. The article is called Informal Capitalism Grows in Cameroon. Grassroots Credit System, Douala, Cameroon. When Samuel Nancy needed $35,000 to open his Jolly Beaver bar here, he did not bother with banks. Instead, he turned to tontines, an informal credit system rooted in African tradition. Without signing a paper or filling out a form, Mr. Nancy emerged from his monthly tontine meeting with $35,000 in cash. I tell people there's no such thing as a black bank. There's not a black bank in existence. There's no such animal, whether it's Freedom National, Carver, or etc. None of them are black banks. Anytime you have a bank regulated by another people and any other people's rules, it's not yours. You're just there. On another occasion, I'll show you where the presence of black banks have retarded black economic development, not advanced it. Other groups will have moved into economic existence and control before they even build a bank. After they build an economic base, then you'll see them build a bank, not the other way around. But dominated people who don't know themselves do it backwards. They build a bank and don't even have anything to invest in, ignoring the fact that banks make money by loans and investments. That's why black banks have suffered. We have to build a basic economic mom and pop base first. It is through lending people money this way and so forth that a banking system grows, not the other way around. But the Negro starts with the bank first because it makes him feel good. It retards us and puts us under the rule of another people. They tell us that we can only do this, that, and the other thing with our money. They let us they let us use our money under our own rules and regulations. We can't raise $35,000. Why can't we raise $35,000 to build ourselves fruit stands and build the stores we want or do something else with it? It's in our tradition. But if we suffer from amnesia, this tradition is not available to us. Yet here's the people, the Cameroonians, who remembered the tradition, and their remembrance of their past and tradition permits them to perform economically. Who says that history is not connected with economics? Do not let anyone tell us that lie from this day on. For years, development economic economists saw African tontines as archaic tribal institutions that would die out with the rise of modern economies based on European style banking systems. In other words, we see the European banking systems were expected to destroy the native systems, which is what they have done to many African countries. The banks are killing our creativity and capacity to use the money that we have in our pockets. But now, many economists see the tontines as a highly efficient method of promoting grassroots roots efforts in capitalism. They cite Cameroon. In the first half of the 1980s, this Central African nation had the continent's highest average economic growth rate of 7% a year. Cameroonians' rate of participation in tontines, 47%, was the highest in 5 French-speaking African countries surveyed by Marcomer Gallup International. By contrast, only 13% of the people surveyed in the 5 nations had savings accounts. Banks don't match the mentality of the people, said Theodore Marie Fonsi, the director of an economic consulting firm here. They are colonial structures. What is he saying? That the economic system set up by Europeans does not match us. It doesn't match our mentality. Where does the mentality come from? History and experience. Tradition. The European banking system comes from another people's tradition, another people's history. It represents the means by which they have developed to deal with their own economic situation. Therefore, it doesn't fit us and our needs. It helps when we, as African Americans, look at our own economic situation in terms of a developing economy. Our economic circumstance is one that requires a rather high level of what is normally called venture capital, high risk capital. When we deal with banks, we're dealing with a system in a so-called mature economy. Therefore, the basis upon which they lend and allocate money, etc., is foreign and separated from our economic reality. That's why when we get turned down again and again, besides the fact that whites want to maintain domination, we must develop a banking system and a money system in line with our economic reality. The article makes this point where the participant in one of these informal systems states, I have attended tontines where the monthly pot is $1 million, said Antoine Nitsimi, a Cameroonian banker with a business degree from the University of Chicago. With a tontine loan, Mr. Nsimi recently started construction of a four-story, $850,000 building that will hold offices, retail stores, and apartments. The monthly pot is worth $1 million. This is a group of people who are organized along the lines of African tradition, which makes available to its members $1 million per month. Here we are, rich and filled with money, and can't even make available to our own people $10 a month. That means that one person belonging to that group each month has available to him or her $1 million to do what he or she needs to do to get done. Did they go to banks? Did they go to the Small Business Administration? No, they went to themselves because they were within their tradition. This article describes a man that went into a tontine and built a hotel. He needed $835,000. He went into the tontines to get it. He's in touch with the tradition, in touch with the past. Don't tell me that our past is not connected to money. It's a lie. All people use their past to create money. In Cameroon, bankers complain of loan delinquency rates as high as 50%. But tontine payments are taken so seriously that borrowers faced with delinquency have been known to commit suicide. Tontines work, economists say, because their loans are backed by a social pressure, a system familiar to Africans. Banks perform poorly because their loans are backed by a paper guarantee made to a stranger, a concept alien to Africans. Tontines exist in much of sub-Saharan Africa, from Burkina Faso to Ghana to Zaire and Rwanda. But Cameroon's Bamaleki tribesmen have popularized interest bearing tontines to such an extent that bankers complain that tontines contribute to the current crisis in the banking liquidity. In their original form, tontines allowed peasants to pool their labor rather than their money. With the introduction of the money economy in the 20th century, tontines took on a financial character as in a formal savings association. Every month, each member would contribute a fixed share into a pot. In a 12-member group, each member would receive the pot once in a year. Didn't forecast and I just talk about that? That it needed to be an equal amount divided by 12 people, and that every month those people needed to be able to give somebody the pot. He had a birthday club. There have been others that have started similar things, but you got to remember that it has to be based on the 12 people. Because if it's more than 12 people, then there aren't 13 months in a year, and somebody's going to get left out or it's going to be imbalanced. So 12 is the appropriate number. The most recent innovation is the interest bearing tontine. Each month, members bid the amount of interest they will pay for the tontine pot. Interest payments are collected in a separate loan fund and were distributed to members when the tontine is dissolved. Tontines are usually formed for 2-year periods and were generally limited to 24 members. In contrast, banks here pay 7% annual interest on savings and lend money at 13% a year. Inflation is about 13%. Interest earned on savings is subject to a 10% tax, while tontines go unrecorded. The most advantageous rates offered by tontines can be traced to their lack of overhead, their ability to set rates according to supply and demand, and their high payment record. Greetings, Oni Tase from the Pro Black Perspective. I'm so glad you're here. Thanks for tuning in. Tontines are built on trust, are generally made up of homogeneous groups, people from the same ethnic background, the same workplace, or the same neighborhood. When people go to banks, they don't feel the same urgency to reimburse the loan, Mr. Ntsimi said. If you don't make your payment to the tontine, you are rejected by the community. If you are banned from one group, you are banned from others. The Koreans have a very similar system. This is from January 22nd, 1989 issue of the Daily News titled Korean Grocers, How They Do It. One quick statement reads, in many ways, Choi is typical of the 1,400 Korean greengrocers who now own and operate about 90% of the retail fruit and vegetable businesses in the 5 boroughs, according to the Korean Produce Association. Behind their success are at least 3 key factors: a willingness to work more hours than most competitors will, reliance on strong family and community ties, and money. Thank you, because things go faster and cheaper that way. Families are people who experience a shared history, which is the basis for their identity. They're not just a bunch of people who happen to live in the same house. What makes them family is not merely being born to the same mother and father, but it is the common experience that they share as a family that ties them together. The commonality of experience and blood is used as the basis for their economic advancement. Strong families, community ties, and cash money. Things go faster and cheaper that way. Read this piece, ladies and gentlemen. If you think you need to go to banks to start a business, the Koreans, needed $60,000 to go into business, they raised it in cash. They raised it in cash, not borrowing, but cash among themselves. When I have Bronx store have no money, everybody help with money. This time, easy to help me, I have credit. He's not talking about the bank. He's talking about his own people. He built the store. He says he does $10,000 worth of business each week, from which he profits $3,000 to $4,000. That's a tremendous turnover on investment. Choi doesn't like borrowing from real banks. If you can get 50,000 or 100,000 through friends, that's a real bank. But we are made to think it isn't a bank unless it's their white folks' bank. He, Choi, the Korean, says that's dangerous, loan at the bank. If a business falters, the bank will, unlike one's family, insist on prompt repayment no matter what, Choi says. In the same paper, another article referred to as cultivating cash states the following. The Korean people have taken over the fruit vegetable businesses in New York, says Andrew Beltram, a longtime worker at the Hunts Point Terminal Market. And they can make the fruits and vegetables more beautiful than anybody else. That's for sure. Sometimes you see 20 buyers over there, and 18 of them are Koreans. Koreans now own about 90% of the fruit and vegetable stores in the city and buy 40% of the wholesale produce supply daily at Hunts Point. With that robust growth, says local Korean business leaders, has been accomplished with money raised almost exclusively within the Korean community, usually from personal savings or loans from relatives, friends, and fraternal or business associations. Still, another funding source is the pooling KE, a kind of very informal, unchartered loan club. Though not illegal, the KEs operate outside U.S. banking laws. For Koreans and other immigrants who find it hard to get banks to take a risk on them, the KEHS, KEHS, have become an important alternative. Typical KE consists of 10 to 12 people. Each kicks in the same amount of cash each month to a kitty. Then, on a rotating basis, the entire kitty is loaned to the members, one at a time. Each member, including the borrower, keeps up the monthly payments until each member has gotten a loan at least once. By the time the cycle is complete, each member has borrowed and paid back the whole loan. The article also talks of how they raise money in the church and other ways. What's this, ladies and gentlemen? People using history and tradition. Our African Caribbean brothers and sisters have remembered that tradition, but African Americans, in an effort to wrongly identify with and imitate white people, have forgotten the tradition that could give us the advantage of the very wealth that's right under our feet and in our pockets. Because we have forgotten our history and our tradition and will not identify with it, we can only enrich other people. Then we say, history ain't going to make you no money. No, it's lack of knowledge of history that doesn't make you money. If we get back to our history, get back to our tradition, we'll make money. I'm not an African who tells us to identify with poverty. I think that the more we identify with our African tradition, the richer we're going to become as a people. I'm not here to sell poverty as a virtue. I'm not here to assert that poverty stricken and welfare laden people are somehow more virtuous and more righteous than people who are making a decent living. That's not my style. We can't say that we are poor and our nations are suffering as a result of our wealth being stolen when if we take that wealth back, won't we won't be richer. How is taking back what belongs to us going to keep us poor? A sure sign then of getting back into one's African self is becoming wealthier, ladies and gentlemen. Does that frighten us? Has the world so convinced us that as a Black people we're destined to be poor? Some of us have that thought, and that's why many of us are frightened of money and wealth. That has been inculcated into us by religions and churches, and the very ones inculcating it in us are living quite well. He's talking about rich preachers. Amnesia means an undiscovered self, an emptiness, a self incapable of self understanding, incapable of understanding its own motivations, a self incapable of self direction and self determination, a reactionary self, a self that does not understand others or the world in which it exists, a fatalistic, externalized self. To rediscover one's history is not only an act of self discovery, it is an act of self creation, a resurrection from the dead, a tearing away of the veil, a revelation of the mystery. To discover our history is to discover our somethingness, our beingness, before someone else created us. To come to know ourselves as we were put, as we were prior to our recreation by alien means, we will be in charge of our own becoming, the creators of our own consciousness, the creation of ourselves as names of the world, the namers of ourselves, which gives us the power of self determination and self direction. What is the past? Where is the past? Is it nothing which was something? Is it something left behind, discarded, detached, and forgotten, without influence and therefore of no account? Does it or can it exist outside the mind and memory of man? Or is it not present in our genes where we carry the evolutionary existence of our kind? Are we not then its present unfolding, its evolvement and manifestation? Or is it not congealed in concrete and mortar, stone and steel structures, and folkways, traditions, mores, and ways of relating? Is it not still present in its negation, its reconstitution, when it is transformed into something new? Is history ever forgotten, or is it merely transformed? Even in the new, history still remains, for the new is fashioned from the old. Therefore, what is now fashioned from before, hence we never leave history behind. Isn't the new then something old? History, conscious or unconscious, comprehended or uncomprehended, never ceases to be. It is only transformed. As transformation, history is always here and now, here today, there tomorrow. History is the past, present, and future. History is destiny. If we will to transform destiny, we must will to transform history. And there's a question and answer section that we're going to read. It's only a few pages and then we'll be all done for the night unless you guys wanted to talk about the book. I liked his conversation about the economic systems personally. It reminds me that the thing that I'm just developing and that I'm just talking about on my own is what we do because it's natural for us to do. It makes sense and is effective for myself, my family, and my community. The first question was unclear, but the response was the tradition I mentioned is referred to as tontine in Cameroon, but I think another West African word for it is isusu coming out of Nigeria. I believe that the word susu still remains in the Caribbean African tradition. One of the beautiful things about it is that it can be practiced in families and small groups between any number of groups. Thus, we can plan in this fashion for the raising of money and funding of our economic development. I think this piece I just read about the Korean can also be instructive. There is a book by Ivan Light called Ethnic Enterprise in America, which talks about ethnicity in America in terms of economics. In the main lecture, I skipped over a section that dealt with the history of sociotherapy. We have to use history as a means of reconstituting our personality and restructuring ourselves. If we found these kinds of economic organizations, it also becomes necessary to restructure social relations to foster trust, reliability, and other positive social characteristics. To go into them purely as economic operations, given the tremendous brainwashing that many of us African Americans have received and the tremendous amount of alienation that has been projected into our personality, sometimes means that we may set ourselves up for disappointment. So we should plan on a number of levels. One level, of course, is the economic one. The other, which I think is the most fundamentally important one, is developing a strong sense of social belongingness in the group. Getting people to meet their monthly obligation, or however you choose to put money in the pot, pretty much relies on the group's ability to apply social pressure and upon the person's fear of social ostracism and the loss of esteem in that group. If the person does not fear a loss of esteem or does not fear social pressure, then you will have people dropping out when they get their million, leaving you in a lurch. So, a part of the deal is we must figure out ways we can build a very strong social unit. As a matter of fact, in part of this Cameroonian article, when members got into a situation where they could not meet the obligations of the group, their social ties were so strong that some of them actually committed suicide rather than not meet the obligations to their group. I'm not suggesting that people go that deeply. However, I do want to stress the importance of first rebuilding and overcoming the alienation that has been projected into us as a people. You don't need a wholesale structured organization with this kind of plan. It can begin in the home, the community, within your social group, From there, it can again begin to become tradition. I like that. Question. I think of the church as a very valuable institution. How do you see the church and what should it become? Of course, the major role of the church is one of propagating and encouraging spirituality, ethics, and rightful behavior among people. Some people would say salvation also. But the church is a social institution like any other institution. It does not have to be stuck with the definition and perception of itself. When you look at TV ads on when you look at ads on TV and hear them on the radio, you'll note that they are designed to bypass a person's critical and analytical scrutiny. They're designed to speak directly to the emotions so that the person acts in terms of feelings instead of reason. Therefore, emotions are the bread and butter of the advertising industry and ultimately in this society, the bread and butter of the economic and social system. So often, we, as Africans in America, are encouraged to be emotional and spiritual. Often, we confuse the two things to the exclusion of critical thinking. We are kept in this emotional, spiritual state, and it's a bogus kind of state. It opens us up to manipulation by external forces such that we cannot bring to bear on our own everyday problems common sense and reasoning. Greetings, Anthony McPhail. Thanks for tuning in. I'm so glad you're here. So, while the church may see its primary role as maintaining spirituality, fostering an emotional spiritual relationship with God, it must also recognize that we are a people living on earth and that we are people who must feed and protect our children and our economic interests. Therefore, the church can and should play an economic role in African American life. There's an interesting book by R.H. Tawney called Religion and the Rise of Capitalism. Also, Weber wrote a book in this vein as well about the relation of Protestantism and capitalism, showing that there's a very clear relationship between the founding of Protestantism and the advancement and development of Western capitalism. Additionally, it shows that there's a relationship between the nature and the theology of the Catholic Church and certain economic structures. So, whether you want to recognize it or not, the church and religion are intimately related to the economic and social structure. So, the church is not separated from money and economics by any stretch of the imagination. This means that we, as Black people, have the right to redefine the church in ways that advance our interests, not only economic interests, but social, political, and many other interests in our lives. We need to look at the church in the context of African life and see how the church, without losing its spiritual and ethical mission, can also function to enhance African economic, social, and political life. Often, people who are economically crushed and economically exploited are people who are weighed down with a sense of guilt, sin, and other kinds of problems. If we study the theology and the life of Jesus, we will read of his struggle with the ideology coming out of the major religious establishment of his time. That establishment was also a part of an economic order and structure that rationalized and idealized that the then economic structure in such a way that people were literally forced into poverty and in many instances forced into sin and degradation. The church, by restructuring itself and by revising its view of itself economically and its role economically, not only can enhance the material well being of the people, but can also better carry out its spiritual and ethical function as an institution. The Black church has tremendous value as an economic institution. Remember, I told you religions are organizing tools. We have church institutions now creating housing, which means that we can begin to use the church and it can become an instrument for the Black ownership of its communities, lands, and properties. These churches are nationally organized institutions. They have hierarchies and systems of communication, etc., which means that we already have national organizations and national networks in the forms of our church organizations. This means much more information can be carried through our churches. These churches can build and encourage businesses. If they can build businesses across this country, we can then build a national network of Black businesses, which will lay the foundation for Black manufacturing. It doesn't do us any good to manufacture and to have no place to sell our products. But when the church brings its political weight to bear and demands white and other merchants who own supermarkets and other businesses make room for a Black manufactured product, when Black manufacturers can get on the shelves of those supermarkets, department stores, and other kinds of outlets, when the church creates shopping malls, buildings, and other things, it creates jobs for construction. It then stimulates the building, manufacturing, and business organizations. So much could grow out of the church viewing itself as an economic unit. Once you build this distribution system and it becomes a national system, which means we are organized as a nation economically, we then are in a position to create a relationship with our African family overseas. Then, with the power that we and the church have economically and politically, we can open up the United States, which is one of the largest economic markets in the world at the time of this writing, to the sale of African products. We then can receive those products and be responsible for their distribution in this nation. Thus, we can then enrich our African brothers, laying the basis for their manufacturing and technological development because they'll have the American markets open to them. What would happen if we sold as many African made radios and boom boxes to Africa adolescents as the Japanese are selling? Before long, the Africans would be a technologically advanced position, rather like that of the Japanese and other nations. So, the viewing of the church and other organizations not only as spiritual organizations, but as economic organizations can lay the foundation and basis for economic and political advancement of African man in this world. If we only narrowly see ourselves as a spiritual people, become otherworldly, and only see ourselves as living well after we die, then of course we're going to catch hell in two places, on earth and after we die. Mm. Question. I am presently taking a course in Western history. Can you state any suggestions on how I can maneuver in this class as a student? Brother Wilson says, I am not one who advocates only taking the African courses. I believe that if you've really achieved your identity, then you can walk among any people. The white mentality is not going to rub off on you. If you know who you are and what you're about, you can expose yourself to other people and other people's knowledge. There's nothing wrong with understanding the psychology of other people, and we must understand that psychology by studying the history of their civilizations and the like. The most important thing is that we have an African perspective when we do so. When you have an African perspective and consciousness, you can take that knowledge and transform it in your own mind for your own use. Just as the European knowledge of African history, civilization, and culture, and believe me, they have the knowledge, is used to European advantage, we can use the knowledge of European history and so called civilization to our own advantage. It's the learning of European history and so called civilization in the absence of a knowledge of who and what we are that destroys us, not just the learning them or the studying of them. It's the studying of them in the absence of this knowledge. In other words, knowledge of African history. When you read the history of Shaka Zulu and other African leaders, you will learn political science. You will learn how to control nations and empires. You will learn what destroys nations and what maintains nations and groups. You will learn statecraft and administration. You will learn all of those things because those things are embedded in the history of our people. Greetings, Sister Raw, and the elders listening with you. Thanks for tuning in. So, if you have grounded yourself and your personality in your own history, in African tradition, and your consciousness is Afrocentric, then the European courses can be of value to you. On a certain level, you can enjoy them. You can enjoy the pleasure of seeing through them. You can enjoy determining why they are distorted. You can see the lies. It really becomes a challenge, a pleasurable challenge, in a way to see the intellectual shallowness of it all, to see the backwardness of it all, to see the regressiveness contained in it all. Much of European philosophy is regressive and infantile. African philosophy is exceedingly profound. Just because we don't have African philosophy written in books doesn't mean it's not profound. There's profound philosophy, ideology, and outlook in African tradition. The beauty of African tradition is that it is not alienated in a book. It is part of and parcel of the total African personality. Studying European disciplines under those circumstances can be of supreme value. With an African centered consciousness, we can take from that tradition that which is of value to us, that which we can use, and also have a basis for rejecting that which is of little or no value or which is harmful and dangerous. Under those circumstances, it is no problem to deal with it per se. That's why I recommend to Africans in universities that they get a solid grounding in African history and tradition before they take other courses. Then move on to other courses. Study them fully and transform them in your interests. Culture and tradition are intellectual tools. When we rediscover our culture and tradition, then African culture and tradition becomes a part of us. We are going to have an intellectual explosion such as this world has never witnessed before. When we rediscover ourselves, our creativity is released. One of the reasons European history is written the way it is to restrict our creativity to music, dance, games, and things that do not directly challenge Europeans. When we re internalize our culture, we're going to gain our genius again. We will regain our analytical skills to use them in our best interests. Because once we know African philosophy, we have a basis upon which we can critically analyze other philosophies. We have a basis on which we can evaluate other people, what other people say. We have a basis for measuring what other people are saying and doing. If we do not have that, a part of our intellect is lost, and we'll find ourselves studying one European's criticism of the other European. We have Africans today quoting one European against another, when you should be saying, a pox on both your houses. I have a whole different perspective. Both of you are wrong. This is real. When we examine the world today, the wars in so called third world countries, look and see if they're not fighting each other over European ideologies instead of basing their political ideology or their rationalizations upon a profound analysis of their own history and experiences and developing what their economic, political, and social program should be based on an analysis of themselves, thereby developing their own intellectual tools as they do so. Instead, they grasp on to an imported foreign ideology, one getting it from the United States, the other one getting it from Russia, and they kill each other over them. The acquiring of an African centered ideology, the infusion of an ideology developed out of one's own history and experience reduces civil war, mutual destruction, and the kinds of troubles we see our people in so much today. Lenin says something like, the capitalist will sell you the rope by which to hang him. The European, by exposing his history, ideology, and knowledge the way he does, is literally putting the rope in our hands with which we can hang him. But we can't hang him unless we possess an African centered consciousness. So get it, go into the courses and get the rope. That is the end of our reading for today, ladies and gentlemen. As you can see, Amos Wilson saw the church very much in the way that I see the church, as an economic tool. Religion is an economy organizing tool, is the easiest economy organizing tool because it tells you how to dress, what to eat, who to patronize, what businesses to go to. You make a consistent donation to it. And if your church is organized in the right way, it is meeting all of your needs and the needs of your community. You can go to your church and ask for a loan if it's organized in the right way. I dropped the link in the chat in case anyone wants to come up. Anthony McPhail says, Happy International Black Women's Month. Thank you so much, Anthony. Happy International Black Women's Month. I like the idea of the tontine. The tontine has 12 people that all invest a certain amount of money every week or every month. And at the end of the month, one of the 12 members gets the entire pot. So if there are 12 people in the tontine and everybody invests $1,000 a month for a year, throughout the course of that year, each member is going to get $1,000. $12,000, excuse me. Each member is going to get $12,000 one time to do and fund whatever they want to do and fund. I think that that's an excellent way for African people to get back on track of trusting one another and of building an economic base for ourselves. Because the problem is that most of us have our money tied up in our everyday living expenses. most of them have Most of us have our money tied up in our everyday living expenses. Anthony McPhail wants me to spell tontine. Tone. Tone. Church as the easiest is an interesting thesis when you open in a church. Oh, Oni, I am not opening a church. I don't know, Oni. I don't know when I'm opening a church, Oni. I don't know. I know that that is the easiest way to get to the African's mind. I know that if I decided to take that route, that I would probably get a lot more viewers. I know that I know that there are channels that push that religion on people and they are brainwashing people. And I have noticed that they get a lot of views, they get a lot of donations. People seem to feel like it is their responsibility to fund and funnel money into these institutions. If I opened a church, my church would be black. Every saint would be black. I would teach you the blackety blackest black version of the Bible and church and religion, and we'd be doing hoodoo and yudu and voodoo and ancestor veneration and all types of things. Only says make it happen, pastors get banked. They do. They do get banked. Anthony, did you see it? Tontine, tontine. It's like a susu in Cameroon. And they limit it to 12 people or 24 people if it's going to last for 2 years. But they limit it based on the number of months that the institution is going to be organized. And if it's for 1 year, they limit it to 12 people. If it's for 2 years, then it's 24 people. And you contribute so much money every month. And okay, great. You contribute so much money every month, and then you get the pot 1 month, and then everybody has a responsibility to, excuse me, to pay their dues, their portion every month. And one person gets the pot every month. All right, great. So I think that that's an excellent way to start because most people are living in survival mode. Most people are paying their rent to a non-African. They are grocery shopping with a non-African. They are paying a car note to a non-African. They are paying their insurance to a non-African. And then they give their tithes and offerings to an African that doesn't reinvest in them. So we have to look at how can we change the dynamics. And one of the things that we can do is start tontines and susus so that people have an opportunity to develop a small economy within this larger economy, because most people can't change where they live, who they got their mortgage from, and any of those things. Most people can't change the car they drive or where they got their vehicle from or the finance company that they used. Most people don't want to change their insurance broker. And even if you change your insurance broker, you're ultimately still funneling money into a white organization or institution. Most people can change the grocery store that they shop at or grow their own food. But when you look at being able to change your grocery store, are you in a position where that particular farmer or that particular Black farmer has all of the things that you need on a schedule that you can live with? Whether it's a farmer's market, a local farmer, a Black farmer that you found on the internet that ships stuff to you, are you able to connect with that farmer on a consistent basis for your food sources? Okay. Most of us can't change our utility companies because those are controlled by regional territories. So you look at being able to change out your food and changing out your church habits so that you can get to the point where you are contributing into a Black economy and building a place where Black dollars can be circulated, and getting yourself involved in the game of this economy where you are circulating money with Black people. All right, guys, if no one wants to come up, I want to thank you all so much for tuning in. Only I will think about taking a religious bend on a different channel so that maybe we can talk about God and all the things that I do. But I interject and share with you guys some of my spiritual practices. But I gotta get my whales down. I want to thank Oni Tase from the Pro Black Perspective for being here, Anthony McPhail for being here, Sister Raw for being here. I know that Koku from the Bitter Medicine Podcast is listening. I know that the Forecast is listening. I know that Bawana Haguziki is listening. I know that KW Don 7 is listening. I know that John Henry is listening. I know that APTV 13 Keys is listening. I know that Brother Bakari is listening, and so many others. And you, yes, you. If I did not say your name, charge it to my head and not my heart, because you know you are my people. I appreciate the support that you give me in spending this time with me. I'll be back Monday with the end of the African Personality in America. I got 4 pages worth of extra notes. I have 4 pages worth of extra notes that I will be going over on Monday. So Monday is going to be a long broadcast. So be ready to bundle to sit in. We'll be finishing the book and we will be going over some of my notes from the book. Good night, you guys. Thank you so much for tuning in. Peace.